Welcome to the Livin'Sky Podcast, a show about raising connected, resilient kids in a world that often forgets what they need most. I'm Lena Livin'Sky, a pediatric speech-language pathologist, holistic feeding specialist, and a mom, here to help you understand your child's body, behavior, and biology in a whole new way. Each episode brings you simple, practical tools to support healthy eating, development, and family connection without the overwhelm. Thanks for listening. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. Today on the Livin'Sky Podcast, I'm joined by Beth Lambert, author, educator, former healthcare consultant, and founder of the nonprofit Documenting Hope. For the past 15 years, Beth has monitored and documented the escalating rates of childhood chronic illness and developmental challenges. She's the author of A Compromised Generation, which explores the origins of this modern health crisis, and the co-author of Brain Under Attack, a resource for parents and caregivers of children with PANS, PANDAS, and autoimmune encephalitis. Through Documenting Hope, Beth leads groundbreaking research into the root causes of children's chronic health issues and how environmental and lifestyle changes can not only improve outcomes, but even reverse disease. She's also a mom of 3 and passionate about raising awareness of the connection between daily choices and human health. Beth, I'm so honored to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you, Lena. It's so good to be with you.
Well, I would love to start with your story. How did you first get involved in helping children who are chronically ill, and what led you into this work?
Well, I got into this work the way many people do, which is through their children. And I started becoming aware of some symptoms that my oldest child had. And then my second child started developing some symptoms, and was the kind of thing that, it wasn't anything that resulted in a diagnosis, but it was enough symptoms that made me knock on a lot of different doors to see what kind of help I could get for them. So some behavioral symptoms, sensory symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms, skin symptoms. And I actually knocked on a conventional medical door for pretty much every one of those symptoms. Different specialists. The only thing they sort of tell you is, put a cream on it, or, they'll grow out of it, or things that weren't really helpful. And I kind of wanted to know, well, what's causing these symptoms? It wasn't apparent to me that my children should have these symptoms, because I couldn't see any reason for it, right? Like, it's kind of things like they would react to eating food. And I was like, that's weird. There's no food allergies in my family. Like, what is that about? But conventional medicine didn't have a lot to offer me. And so I ended up in the office of an integrative physician. I also have a sister-in-law who happened to be a naturopath. And, through those experiences of starting to talk to people who saw things from a more holistic perspective, a whole child perspective, I started asking the question about, well, what's causing the symptoms? What's the roots? And these are the people who can answer those questions. They could talk about things like diet, nutrition, lifestyle, toxicity, and things that might be contributing. And of course, I was like, I had no idea to even think about these things, right? Because we come from this place where we're so caught up with this idea of genetic determinism, that it's like your genes that make or break your health. Like, they determine whether you end up being sick or get a disease or what have you. So that really opened my mind. And then as I progressed down that process of learning, I learned how to make all kinds of diet changes and environmental changes and see their health from a totally different perspective, and understand that symptoms were just telling me that something was out of balance, and that I totally had control over putting things back into balance across, a number of different parameters. So that's sort of where I started my work. And then as my kids' health issues completely resolved within a short
Amazing.
period of time, like a couple of months, and turned things around. But I was also a young parent, and I was in some play groups, and I took my kids to preschool, and I saw a lot of other kids. And I just kept getting this nagging feeling like something is not right. Like, all of these kids are getting autism diagnoses, and that one's not talking, and that one's delayed in their walking. And everybody's kid in my baby play group is on Prilosec. Like, it just felt so something was wrong. And it's the kind of thing where, my mother, the grandmothers often know, because they raised children a generation ago when kids weren't
Right.
sick. And my mother would say things to me like, it's really weird that there's so many kids with autism. I'm like, yeah, that is kind of really weird. And that thought process really led me down this path of wanting to know why so many kids were developing symptoms and getting these diagnoses. And also, in the process of seeking alternative, integrative kind of approaches for my own kids, I ended up meeting other parents who are doing the same thing, who had kids with much more serious issues than my kids, like autoimmune diseases or autism, who were fully reversing their kids'
Amazing.
conditions by using these integrative and holistic modalities. And then I was like, further had my mind cracked open, because I was like, what? Autism is reversible? What are you even talking about? That's a genetic condition. So I became aware of this whole other world of health and healing through these experiences. And I felt so compelled just by my own children's healing journey, my own family's healing journey, and then meeting the other families who had fully reversed their kids' conditions. I mean, I'm talking about like life threatening food allergies that people were able to reverse. And I would ask the question of these integrative doctors or these parents, like, why does everyone not know about this?
Right.
Why are we wasting our time going to the gastroenterologist and getting like pharmaceuticals? Why are we wasting our time going to the allergist and getting nothing? So that really lit a fire under me because I'm like, if we can heal these kids, why are we not doing that? So that's where I wrote my book, A Compromised Generation, both to understand why our kids were so sick, what in the environment had changed that was contributing to this, but also to try and really push people towards the solutions because our conventional medical system is not set up to look for root causes or to heal. It's meant to suppress symptoms. And prior to becoming a parent, I'd actually worked in the pharmaceutical industry.
Mm.
And like, that's what I thought you did. Like, you have a symptom or a diagnosis, you get this pill. It's a pill for every
Right.
ill. And that is how our mindset in the Western medical model is set to think. And I know there's a much better way to do things. So that really just triggered what has become, the last 15 years I've been working with Documenting Hope as a nonprofit organization to try and bring these resources out to parents
Yeah.
and to try and see what we can do to shift the needle
Yes.
and become have a standard of care that is looking at root causes and healing.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly the way we need to go. And it's so refreshing to see this conversation take main stage right now, right? With this Maha movement and everything else, where this is becoming, I think, less taboo. Because back in the day, whenever you started to speak out about something like this, I mean, as a parent or as a practitioner, sometimes you were labeled as somebody who was, a little bit off. Like people, there was stigma
Mhm.
around it. So I'm loving this conversation taking this front stage now, where we can actually say these things out loud. Because not only is it important to have this conversation, but there's so much we can do to help our children, and we need to just start doing these things. We need to start making changes.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's really encouraging to see that people are now paying attention to things like food and clean air and clean water and looking for beyond the pill because before it was like we were like in this mindset we couldn't look beyond conventional medicine, but now there's so many options out there. I think the biggest thing that's preventing us from really shifting over into that new model is the payer system, in that we have what's paid for by insurance companies or what the government will pay for is only the conventional
Yes.
medical model. So that's really, our major barrier, but I think that will change over
I
time.
hope so. Yeah, that's really a big conversation because, like you said, if you want to go to like a functional practitioner, oftentimes it's out of pocket and not everybody can afford that. So that's a big barrier.
Right,
Yeah. So, in
exactly.
your research, what are some of the most significant environmental stressors and factors driving the rise of chronic health in children, chronic disease?
Yeah, so when I was writing my book, and that would have been it was published in 2010, based on what you can find in the medical literature then, there were some very clear variables that we could identify, that were contributing to this epidemic. I mean, there's so much evidence that antibiotics and all the sanitary things we do to disrupt our microbiome are a big factor in this childhood epidemic. I mean, they completely just like when you, interrupt your or disturb your microbiome with something like an antibiotic, but also birth control pills, proton pump inhibitors, any chemicals like chlorine or glyphosate. There's so many things in our environment that disrupt the microbiome that is going to impact your immune system, your ability to digest and extract nutrients from your food. I mean, it's affecting your neurotransmitters. I mean, that is such a big piece of the puzzle. It's actually when I wrote that book, I spent so much time talking about gut bacteria because that's a major, major
Yes.
category. Chemicals in the environment affect that, but chemicals on their own, synthetic chemicals, heavy metals, these are such a major factor too because they weren't there in the numbers they are now. Like that just 75 years ago, we didn't have all these petrochemicals and synthetic chemicals in our environment. And we're just, every consumer product seems to be the latest chemical on the market that's never been tested for safety. So I think that there's some obvious factors that are contributing, perhaps over vaccinating our kids when our gut microbiome is out of balance, sort of the stress of modern living. These are things that I could easily identify through the medical literature, and that was 15 years ago. What I called it then was kind of
Mhm.
the perfect storm of living in the modern
Yeah.
world, basically, that's causing these issues for our kids. Subsequently, as I tried to talk to people about that and really get that narrative out there so people would start paying attention to these things, what I kept experiencing was pushback,
Yeah.
where people would say, well, there's no evidence. And, that's actually not true. Nobody spent any time in PubMed looking to see whether there's evidence or not. There's totally evidence for all those things I just mentioned and tons of it. But what is harder for people to wrap their brain around is, they want to think like there's one thing. Okay, so there's one antibiotic by this brand name that causes this outcome. And that's not how the real world works. People are looking for singular causes, smoking guns. Life is way too complicated for that. So I felt like what we needed to do was really study how living in the modern world actually impacts our health and growth and development, our kids' health, growth, and development. So I felt like it was important to change the way we do research so that we can understand that kind of complexity. So we actually designed a research study. It's called CHIRP, which stands for Child Health Inventory for Resilience and Prevention. And it's essentially a massive questionnaire that asks parents to catalog all the things in their child's life that might have contributed to their chronic health condition. So it's asking about the mom's health prenatally, it's asking the mom's health preconception, dad's health preconception. So looking multi-generationally, it's asking about, what the child might have been exposed to in utero, in the
Yeah.
neonatal period. What was the birthing experience like? What kinds of food does the child eat? What do they put on their skin? What kinds of light is in their home? Is there mold in the home? Anything that you could think of that might impact a child's health and wellness or positively or negatively. Like we ask questions like, do you go outside and spend time in the sunshine in the sun without sunscreen? Do you go into natural spaces with trees and,
Yeah.
forests and things like that? We ask all of these questions to try and get a handle on what is the totality of modern living look like and how does it impact children's health? So the preliminary data we collected in that study told us a number of things. And we're still running the study. It's actually paused right now while we're redesigning and shortening it so we can get more data because it's very, very long. And that's a barrier to getting people to complete the survey.
Mhm.
But what we did learn from the first version of this survey is it validated this concept of total load. And total load just means the cumulative and synergistic impact, compounding impact of having many, many stressors on your body, things that you're exposed to. And the more stressors you have, the worse the health outcomes
Right.
are. So our data demonstrated that the kids who had more chemical stressors, more antibiotics, more emotional stress because parents are fighting in the home or whatever it is, all of those stressors matter. And the more a child has, the worse their health outcomes. They're more likely to have very debilitating conditions or more likely to have developmental
Yeah.
conditions. And that's the other thing we learned through this research too, is when children have these stressors, during the critical developmental time, prenatally, neonatally, more of those stressors, that oftentimes results in neurodevelopmental conditions. So autism, ADHD, sensory processing disorders, et cetera. So the timing of that total load matters. And just the fact that we are exposed to so many variables that are toxic to our health, that really matters. So that work is ongoing, and we need to collect a whole lot more data to be able to publish about it. But we're out there telling people what we're seeing in the
Yeah.
preliminary. And it's just how we live in the modern world. We have become so distant from the way that we as humans evolved and how we live. We don't see the sun. We don't touch the earth. We don't eat foods that are real. We don't have time for the nurturing community-based relationships that we used to have. I mean, it's such a different way of living, and of course, it's going to impact our health. So we have a lot of work to do to sort of just get back into rhythm with the way that humans evolved for
Yeah.
millions of years.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you have to, shut off electricity in your home. There's so many things you can do at home to get back closer to that way of living, which is so healthy for us. This is what our biology needs. So, what are some of the things that parents can do that are not overwhelming to bring in some of these healthy lifestyles into their home?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just use the framework of more natural generally is better rather than, and synthetic is generally not good. And you don't have to take it to an extreme. Of course, something like mercury or lead are natural. They're in the natural environment, but we don't want to have the exposures to those. But what I mean is just sort of living more in rhythm with nature and living closer to how maybe our great grandparents lived.
Hmm.
So some simple things around that are like just think about the cadence of your day. People used to get up when the sun rose, right? And then they would sort of wind down as the sun was going down. And there wouldn't have been like a lot of stimulation and activity in the evening. And then as a result, they would have restful sleep, restorative sleep. And we don't have that in the modern world. Why? Because we get up before it's light because we're rushing to school or rushing to an activity or rushing to work or whatever it is. Then we work, 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 work. We are busy, busy, busy. And then we come home in the evening when it's dark, we're supposed to be winding down and building to that, that sleep and slumber. We actually have these blue light devices on that are telling us it's daylight and keep going. And that's stressing your adrenals and stressing your bodies and pumping blood sugar. Like it is an unnatural state for our bodies to be on devices in the evening, to be under bright lights in the evening. But that's how we live. That's one example of like comparing the way people used to live to the way people live now. That's a sort of rhythm of life thing. And you could say the same thing about stress. Why are we constantly rushing and making things feel more important than they are? Like trying to take the kids, for instance, very common in modern, like middle America, is trying to do all these activities with like this lesson and that sports activity and
Yeah.
this, and everybody's stressed trying to get here and there. And that doesn't seem like that's necessary. And our bodies don't need that kind of pace. We're not used to that. So I think those are rhythm related,
Yeah.
choices we make with our day. But the other piece of it that I think is critically important that parents can really easily grab control over in their own family is the food we eat and the stuff we have in our homes. So the food we eat it's become so natural to go into a grocery store and get things in boxes and packages that are you just rip it open and eat it. That's not the way humans did food. We grew our own food. We stored it. We prepared it a certain way. We harvested it
Yeah.
and ate it fresh. We ate it local. And
Right.
that is how our human bodies evolved, is that kind of food. And so we are putting toxic chemicals into our bodies through food, preservatives, additives, colorings. All of our food has become nutrient depleted because the soils have been
Yeah.
overused with industrial agriculture, not to mention the pesticides and herbicides. So the more natural you can go with food, closer to nature, prepared at home, whole foods, the healthier you're gonna be. And the same thing goes with products like shampoos, soaps, laundry detergent, cleaning agents. Like we have all these products. Like if you walk into like Target or Walmart, there are just aisles and aisles of crap
Yes.
that like weren't there 75 years ago. Like your grandma was using baking soda and Castile soap, to clean the house, or
Yeah.
vinegar. And we don't necessarily need all those
Right.
products. It would be a lot less expensive if we didn't use all those products. Or you just buy the ones that are, if you're gonna buy products, buy the ones that are a little bit more natural. Again, Castile soap. You can use that for a million purposes in your house. It's non-toxic, it's made from coconut, and it'll do the job.
Yeah.
So I think those are, like, very practical things that parents can do to try and, again, bring the family back into balance with nature and do things that support health
Mhm.
rather than sort of the cultural norms, which are toxic,
Yeah.
plastic, chemical, because that's how it evolved. It's sort of like the
Yeah.
the frog in the boiling pot of water. We're not really even aware, as the heat has been turned up, right, that these things are contributing to our health issues, but here we are, and it's time for us to just sort of pay attention to the way we're living.
Absolutely. It's a true epidemic. And I love some of the ideas you have thrown out here because it doesn't have to be expensive to do this. Like, right, you could just get a big bottle of vinegar, mix it with water, use it as a cleaner. It doesn't have to be you have to go out and buy this entire like fancy brand of natural cleaners. It could be very basic and it doesn't have to feel so overwhelming. Because for
Mhm.
moms, it can be, right? We have this never ending to do list. And it doesn't have to be that at all. It's essentially just instead of getting these complicated products, you just go back to the basics and just do it in a very simple way that fits your needs. If you have products left over that you don't want to waste, use them. But just the next one, be very mindful of what you're gonna get next. Because that can make a big difference in your child's health and your health, your entire household. I'm a huge believer that light is one of the most powerful medicines for our kids and for us. That's why I love Bon Charge. Their blue light blocking glasses, red light therapy devices, and many other products are designed to support your circadian rhythm and help your family sleep and feel better naturally. In our modern world of screens and artificial light, these small shifts make a big difference. Calmer evenings, deep sleep, better focus, and happier moods. I use Bon Charge products every single day, and even my son has his own pair of blue light blocking glasses for evening story time. You can check out all their products at boncharge.com and use code LENAL to save 15% off your purchase.
Right, exactly. And if I remember talking to somebody once about making these changes in her house, and I remember her saying something to me, like something to the effect of like, I'm not crunchy. I don't wanna be crunchy. And I was like, "Okay, I get it." Like, I don't have a problem with that. So, like, I'll do everything that's in that sort of crunchy world. And even if you don't wanna be, that kind of live that kind of life, like, closer to the earth and, eating the carrots right out of the ground, you can replace a lot of the things that you have in your home that are the more, like, name brands like the Tides or the things made by SC Johnson Wax, like, those more chemical things. There's plenty of, like, really beautiful, bougie cleaning products or personal care products, or, like, you can swap things, and there's so many more non-toxic products out there. There's a great company called Made Safe that actually verifies whether or not they're toxic, and you can use the Environmental Working Group has a database called Skin Deep where you can go in and look and see if you want to replace your shampoo, for instance. You can go in and type in the name of different shampoos, or there's even an app where you can scan it and find out ones that don't have any toxic chemicals in them that you can just replace your existing
Yeah,
ones.
I know. That's the good side of technology we've come across, right? Like it could be so easy. I feel like sometimes just starting can feel so hard, but you don't have to swap everything in your home. It can be little thing here and there. Just start with the shampoo and then go from there.
Mhm,
Doesn't have to be this
mhm.
huge, huge transformation right away.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Thank you. That's such great advice. And many parents, because I work with picky eaters, this is kind of what I do on a daily basis. So I wanted to ask you a bit about that because I know you come across so many different kids with so many different needs. But many parents are told that picky eating is just a phase, right? I hear that a lot. And I think back in the day, that was more true than it is today.
Yeah.
It's just becoming a huge issue. So, from your perspective, how might picky eating actually be a signal of some deeper imbalances in the body?
Yeah, I mean, I think picky eating is just like any other symptom, like a gastrointestinal pain could be a
Yeah,
symptom. Picky eating is a symptom. So,
exactly.
what is contributing to that symptom? So, there's any number of things that could contribute. There could be like a structural symptom, like a tongue tie. There could be a motor issue that is preventing them. Like there could be a sensory issue. There could be a nutrient imbalance, like not having enough zinc on board, for instance. Like so, there's all these functional things that you can look at that might contribute to the symptom we call picky eating. And I totally agree with you that maybe that was a phase and there is something developmentally appropriate about that. And kids are always in a place of sort of like testing and this idea of individuation, sort of like trying to understand themselves as compared to their parent, usually mom, but not always, sometimes dad. And picky eating can be folded into that too, testing and I'm not gonna eat this. But I do think that, as you know, as your area of expertise, like you have to look under the hood to be like, what is contributing to the picky eating? It isn't always about what the food is, right? Sometimes it's about like what is out of balance in that child, with sensory, nutrition, functional, structural, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it all connects back to this chronic illness epidemic too because it is very rare for a picky eater just to be behavioral. It's usually like chronic illness of some sort that's happening there, a biological issue, constipation. It could be so many different things. But there's something wrong with the body, unfortunately, and it's sending us a signal of being picky about food. And, kids, this is how they're protecting themselves sometimes, right? Because they can't handle the food. Maybe they can digest it well or whatever it is going on, or maybe they can chew it well. And then this is the behavior that surfaces. I agree.
Yeah, we actually when we started this work, we had created kind of a laundry list of what we call the soft signs and the soft signs of being affected by this epidemic. We still have that on the Documenting Hope website. So if you actually went to the search bar and typed in soft signs, you could find this article. And it's just like a huge laundry list of symptoms that are very common, whether it's chronic constipation or picky eating or chronic diarrhea or pink cheeks after eating or any bedwetting. There's all these soft signs that people are now beginning to say are just part of childhood. And we're like, not so much. They're not just part of childhood. They're actually the child's body showing that it's dysregulated in some way, that there is some kind of imbalance, usually multiple layers of imbalance. But the good news is if you're seeing those soft signs, maybe before you have a diagnosis, that's your opportunity. That is your like sacred wake up call to say, all right, I see a symptom. The symptom means something's out of balance. Let's look under the hood and see if we can't find what that imbalance is and try and help my child regulate.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's so many different ways of you can go about that. But what's beautiful about this problem happening in childhood, quote unquote, our kids are so young, they're so adaptable, and there could be just a few little changes need to do for them to heal from some of these symptoms, right? You said your son, it took you a few months to reverse these symptoms, which is to me incredible. I think as adults, because we have grown up in this world, oftentimes it takes years and years of work on our bodies, and our kids have this opportunity to kind of not always, but sometimes just do the hard work for a few months and then catch up where they need to be.
I hear oftentimes parents who will say, "My child is 7 or my child is 8," and like they're picky eating. There's no way I'll get them to change their diet because they're too old. Maybe my child's 11 and he's always eaten this way, so I'm never going to be able to get him to change. And I'm like, today is the easiest day it'll ever be. It gets harder as they get older, so I don't care what age your child is, so you start today because it gets harder every subsequent day you decide to work on those changes. But, again, it's not I think there's not enough tools for parents. I love that you have that as your specialty because I think picky eating is one of the greatest unmet needs out there right now for parents because everybody wants their children to eat healthy. Everybody wants to do what they know it would be helpful to support their child's health,
Mhm.
but it can't functionally happen day in and day out because of the issues that the child is dealing with. So
Exactly.
I feel like it's important that we share resources on how to overcome the picky eating because there's not a lot that conventional medicine offers for that
No.
out at all. Maybe feeding
Right.
therapy.
And feeding therapy has so many limitations as well. Just because I'm an SLP, so this is where my training came from, just from the therapeutic perspective. And it's amazing in so many different ways. However, we focus on behavior and we just ignore most of the time. Most therapists, they don't look at the medical aspect of things. We will look at the oral motor if we're trained, but we don't look at the microbiome. There are so many different things we just don't explore. Unfortunately, without those pieces, it's hard to make progress, right? We can't ignore that anymore.
And also, if you think about autism too as a category, all that we typically offer from the conventional medical standpoint for autism is behavioral. The only thing I mean, there is speech language, PT and OT that is reimbursed in some instances, but not universally. The only thing that is universally reimbursed in 50 states is ABA,
Yes.
applied behavioral analysis. And a lot of people are beginning to see and understand that ABA is actually, in some ways, almost abusive because it is trying to get and force children to do certain behaviors that their bodies are medically physiologically, functionally not able to do, and we're forcing it. I always use this analogy of like, if you had like a colander, that you rinse things out in and you took some pasta, some
Mhm.
dry pasta. ABA is always to me like trying to take the pasta, the dry pasta, and get it to nicely, fit into that colander. What do you have to do to get it to fit in the colander? You have to break
Yeah,
it, right? But really what needs to happen is you need to cook it first before it softens and then it'll go into the colander. That's kind of the analogy I use
I love
because
it.
it's like something needs to change before you can get to the behavior, before you can address the behavior. The behavior is just if there's a behavior you don't like or a behavior you don't want, that's just communication. That's just a way that this child is trying to tell you something about the dysregulation or imbalances in their
Mhm.
body. So as a society, we are almost being like abusive, certainly neglectful of children with autism for not considering their medical issues, for not looking at their microbiome and the mitochondrial issues and the motor issues, and forcing this behavioral therapy that is counterproductive in many cases. And the
Right,
reason why I think this happened is because all these ABA centers started showing up because of the need. Right,
right.
and there was some research that had backed it that showed that it actually improved some of the behaviors or it resulted in compliance with behaviors, and autism was so new and nobody knew what to do with it, and then what started happening was some private equity firms started buying up all these ABA centers and aggregating them into consolidated businesses. Then they went to the state legislatures to get the state legislatures to pass laws requiring insurance companies to cover ABA.
So
So you could
dark.
say on one hand, like, there's probably a lot of parents who are like, "Yeah, but I want that
Yeah.
covered because, it's helpful for my child," and that's fine, but we should also be getting coverage for therapies and strategies that are medically treating these
Right.
children and helping support their overall health and not just trying to enforce compliance, behavior.
Absolutely. I see it over and over again. And I've worked with many pediatricians over the years. The problem also is that doctors, they don't know what to do. They think, okay, I have a child on the spectrum. What am I going to do? I'm going to refer for therapy. I'm going to refer for ABA. It's never like, "Oh, let me look under the hood. Let me help. Let me see what I can do to balance their body, balance their health." Like, oftentimes, unfortunately, this is what I see. These referrals, they just come through because they don't know about it. We're not trained. Pediatricians are not trained. They're often missing these things.
Yeah, a lot of the pediatricians, when they were in medical school, autism wasn't an epidemic.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue, go back 20 years ago and say, yeah, it was an epidemic for sure, but not like it is today. But yeah, so a lot of the pediatricians that have been practicing for a while, it wasn't part of their medical school
No.
training. It was like the rare disease category or the rare
Mhm.
condition category. And maybe you got like a little bit of training on it, but certainly, and even, the conventional medical narrative is still that it's genetic. So if something's genetic, there's nothing you can do, right? So that's why therapies are all that's offered, is because they are misguided to think that this is solely based on somebody's genes. Now, genes obviously are important, but we all know that that's only one tiny piece of the picture, and the rest of it is environmental and developmental and modifiable through therapies and all the medical treatments we've been talking about.
Exactly. Well, speaking of autism, there's been a lot of buzz in the media recently with the autism rates rising and talk about medication and what could be contributing to this problem. So, a lot of parents wonder about the safety of common medications, and there's been talk about Tylenol recently. So, what is your take on this? Do you think this is enough? This conversation about Tylenol and the medication causing it, and maybe mercury and aluminum contributing to it from vaccines that's being taken out. Do you think this is enough that we're doing right now with this conversation when it comes to chronic disease and autism? You know, these days when your child refuses everything you make and you just want them to have something nourishing, that's when I grab Signals. It's a real food meal replacement shake made with organ meats, minerals, and nutrients that support kids' biology, not just fill them up. It's rich in iron, zinc, and B vitamins, the building blocks for growth, focus, and strong immune systems. And it's great for the gut. And the best part? Nate calls it his ice cream shake. That's how delicious it is. And as a mom, it feels amazing to know he's getting what his body truly needs without the fight. You can learn more at feedyoursignals.com, and don't forget to use Lena10 at checkout for 10% off your purchase.
Well, I think the conversation around Tylenol is good in that people are having a dialogue about it in the first place, because there is good evidence that Tylenol has an effect on a cellular level, impacts the liver, impacts your ability to detox, it impacts your ability to make glutathione, which is what you need to help detoxify in this increasingly polluted world. And, what's very common also is that children are given things in combination. So they might have Tylenol before and after, for instance, which depletes their glutathione before and after when they're having an inflammatory response to whatever vaccine they got, and they need that glutathione to be at normal store levels. So the compounding factor isn't being discussed as much. And then the other thing that happens too is a lot of times kids will get antibiotics and then Tylenol, or antibiotics and then a vaccine. And so we want to look at the combination and the synergies of these things. But what I want us to be careful about is not attributing too much to
Mhm.
any one variable. And I'll give you a great example. 10 years ago, I went to a fundraiser for an organization called Healthy Child, Healthy World, which was focused on the environmental factors that influence children's health. And they had as a guest speaker, Dr. Harvey Karp, who was this, famous pediatrician who had written a couple books. And there was a Q&A period where the audience got to ask Dr. Karp some questions. And somebody stood up and said, "I'm really concerned about the rising rates of autism." This was 10 years ago. "Well, what do you think is causing it?" And Dr. Karp goes, "It's BPA." And I was like,
Mm.
and I had dark about like multiple variables and all the factors, the total load kind of perfect storm synergy. And I was like, why does he think BPA? And he had this whole like multiple paragraph discourse on why BPA is causing autism. And basically, he had cited a couple of papers that were well done that established a link between BPA, bisphenol A, which is a plasticizer. It softens plastic. It's a chemical. It's an endocrine disrupting chemical. And he had a very plausible, reasonable explanation as to why BPA would be a major cause of autism. And this is what we do. There's a set of studies that come out that show the link, sometimes even a causal link. You could say, like, for instance, there was Hannah Pauling was a case that of a little girl who had a documented vaccine injury because she had a mitochondrial dysfunction that preceded her vaccine. She got the vaccine and she developed autism. That's a causal link that was sort of established through that court case. And you can have medical literature that shows associations or causal links. And so what people do is they take that one thing
Mhm.
and say, see, here's medical literature that says this causes that. But in the modern world, you're going to find kids who have autism who never had
Yeah.
Tylenol, who never were exposed to BPA, who never had vaccines. But then how do they have autism if autism is caused by all those things? And the answer is it's super bio-individual. It is so bio-individual. And you can begin to understand what's happening with autism by looking more thematically. And as an example of that, there's a researcher at the University of Texas named Dr. Claudia Miller, and she's done some phenomenal work looking at maternal and paternal immune
Mhm.
activation and how that correlates with ADHD and autism. And she's done this fabulous work that shows that, like, mothers and fathers who have been exposed to a lot of chemicals, solvents, things that create like a multiple chemical sensitivity in a parent, can influence those parents' of having a child with autism. And it's like 500% increase chance just because the parents have been exposed to chemicals before the child was even conceived. So
That's
what that tells me is that it's the immune activation, it's the toxicity, it's the nutritional deficiencies. It's like these themes, right? But there's lots of things that cause nutritional deficiencies. There's lots of things that cause maternal immune activation and paternal because it comes down the germline even from dad. So there's so much evidence for all of these variables. But if we fixate on one, like Tylenol, it's good to know that Tylenol is probably not helpful and it could be harmful, so we should be taking it out, but we need to see the bigger
yeah.
picture here and not quibble and quabble about which particular thing it is that's causing autism. It's all of it. It's modern living,
Yeah.
guys, and we need to start thinking about all the little variables that are not natural, that our bodies have not adapted to, and see if we can push those to the side and just start living more in tune with nature.
Yeah.
Always come back to
Yeah. And I think that's the answer for almost any medical issues, almost, right? Because it's really just living closer to nature that's going to help so many different ailments, whatever is happening in your body and in your home, you know? Yes, environment.
yeah, and also you can think like practically, like, so there's been studies that linked autism to antibiotics, for
Mhm.
instance. So, you know that there might be it's like having antibiotics is not good for your gut health. And, maybe I want another choice. Like, is there something else I could take besides antibiotics? And of course, we want antibiotics available for life and death situations. If you've got sepsis and you're in the hospital and you're going to die if you don't have antibiotics, of course you want to take
Yeah.
that. Like, you're going to pick those choices. But we should also be aware of the other tools that are out there. So, for instance, I know quite a few herbalists who have wonderful natural herbal tools that serve antibiotic purposes in terms of being antimicrobial or fighting infections using herbs that don't cause widespread gut dysbiosis, that are more gentle on the gut, that are easier on the
Mhm.
liver, for instance. And those are backed by hundreds and thousands of years of people using these approaches. Like, think about traditional Chinese medicine. They've been using herbs for 5,000 years, and they have so much wisdom. But it's, the Western medical model is like, that's the stuff from 5,000 years ago is like, it's no good. Like, it's sort of this arrogance. But I think that's what we need to be doing is thinking about, like, what other tools do we have in our toolbox to deal with things like infections?
And also, like, question some of the medical advice you get because sometimes I think antibiotics are about overprescribed about 70% of the time. So question your pediatrician, like, do I really need this for a sore throat right now? Do I really
Mhm.
need it for an ear infection right now? Because even the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think they say you should wait about 72 hours before taking antibiotics for an ear infection because most of the time it's viral. So it's so many things to consider. And I think just you have to learn about and so that you can question this advice. And it's okay because you are the biggest advocate for your child. It's always going to be the parent or the caregiver, right?
Mhm.
Nobody else. And it's okay to question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting to remember that, like, our American-centric way of doing things isn't always the best way,
Mhm.
and an example of that is other countries for ear infections have different first-line treatment strategies. Like Germany, for instance, when a child comes in, and this is not universal, but in many clinics in Germany, child comes in with ear infection, their first line of treatment is homeopathy.
Love that.
So, like, could we adopt that? Not now because doctors here don't even know what homeopathy is, right? Unless they've been trained. There are some great doctors who actually use homeopathy as well. But I'm just saying, like, and then in China and places in China, they're using herbs rather, like, so let's think about what other countries are doing. How does it work for
Yeah.
them,
Yeah, and it works, right? Because when we look at the rates of chronic disease, United States, it's very high, in the instances, and other countries are much lower. So maybe they are doing something right. Who knows?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. We're leading the way in chronic
Yes,
disease.
we sure are. And we do have to start questioning it. So, this is why I love your work so much. And so, I think some of this information can be overwhelming to parents. So, for those who feel overwhelmed and they're like, okay, so what do I do? How do I start? What are some really actionable things? And I know we spoke about this briefly, but something that I can do, 3 things I can do at home right now that don't feel so overwhelming, that are going to
Mhm.
positively impact my child's health.
Yeah, so I actually think the first thing that you might wanna do if you're thinking about making changes, because it's hard to make changes, it really is, and what we're asking people to do is live counterculture, because the American culture is, like, synthetic, it is fast, it is stressful, it is, like, it's a way of living that is just not healthy, so living counterculture, it feels very isolating. If you're gonna not go to the grocery store and buy the things in the aisles, in the middle aisles, and then you're gonna, start using lemon juice and baking soda to clean, like, it just feels like you're creating yourself as different, right? It's like that what I mentioned before about, I don't wanna be a crunchy mom. Like, "Oh, that's not me?" It just is very uncomfortable for people. So I think for people who are feeling overwhelmed, if you can find other people who are interested in living a more healthful way, a lot of times it's Facebook groups, like there's so many like crunchy moms of this or holistic moms of that, like different locations. Like those are great places to start just because you don't feel so alone. And doing it by yourself is very, very hard. So I think that would be like the first thing I would think about for people who are overwhelmed. And then the next thing after that is just starting at home and just taking inventory of what's in your house. And actually the study I mentioned before, CHIRP, it's called Child Health Inventory for Resilience and Prevention, because what we do after parents finish the survey, when they're done with it, they get a personalized report that highlights in their report every answer that is a demonstrated stressor on their child's health. So, for instance, we ask in there, does your family use fragrance laundry detergent? Does your family use dryer sheets that have fragrance on them? If fragrances are synthetic and chemicals. And so, if they answered yes, they would get on this report that answer highlighted in orange. So, they'll get a report back with all of these answers. Some will be highlighted in orange and some will not. And it's almost like a blueprint
Yeah.
for, what you could do to help reduce that child's total load. We created that because we wanted there to be sort of almost like a
Mhm.
checklist for you to follow about things you might not even be aware of in your life that are stressors. So in that vein and in that spirit, I think if you just take an inventory of what's in your house and ask yourself, like, would my grandmother have had this in her home? And start slowly taking out the things that are more synthetic. Fragrance products would be like the number one easiest thing I would do. Just go through your house and be like, what in my house is fragranced? The smelly stuff is usually toxic. The exceptions would be sometimes things have fragrances that are from essential oils, more natural sources. But generally speaking, if you have fragranced anything in your house, it's an endocrine disruptor and it's affecting your
Mhm.
health. So that would be like a second very easy thing I would do is start phasing those things out and finding things without fragrances. And then I think, if I were to think about another sort of foundational thing to do, which this is a little different from when I've talked about like food and nutrition and all that kind of stuff, turn your Wi-Fi off at night. So
Mm.
people don't think about this as a stressor, but it is so freaking easy to just do
Mhm.
this. Take your router and unplug it
Yeah.
at night or put it on a timer. It's even easier if you get like one of those like light timers and you put your router into that timer and you turn it off at night. Because EMF exposure, electromagnetic radiation from your Wi-Fi, from your devices, et cetera, actually is a very significant health stressor, but it's invisible. You can't smell it, you can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't see it. So you don't even know it's there. But it's one of the easiest things you can reduce. If you're in a home that is like a freestanding home, if you're in an apartment building, it's harder because you've got everybody else's Wi-Fi, so that's definitely a little harder. But at least if you can reduce that, it's EMF is about proximity. How close are you to the phone? How close are you to the device? How close are you to the Wi-Fi router? So if you can put devices away from your sleeping area and turn off the Wi-Fi at night, that is a very easy thing to do that helps support your health. And when you're sleeping, that is when your body's repairing, it's restoring all of the damage to tissues from the day. It is when your brain actually detoxes. You have this lymphatic system in your brain called the lymphatic system, and when you sleep, it drains all the toxins out of your brain.
Wow.
And the Wi-Fi can interrupt your sleep. It can open up the blood-brain barrier
Wow.
and allow for toxins into your brain. So that, again, is a very easy, simple thing that most people can do, and it's not that hard.
It's really not. I have a timer myself. It's a godsend because you forget. It's hard, you know? It's like, oh, another thing I have to do every night is just unplug it. It feels that way sometimes when you're overwhelmed, and it's so easy. And I heard you speak on a different podcast a while back about how that has helped one child who had alopecia, right? He was sleeping
Oh, yeah.
too close to the router, and turns out that was a major stressor on his body.
It was actually even more complicated than that, and this is not everybody can find this out, but that was a child enrolled in our flight study, and our flight study was an intervention program where we basically went into these, families' homes to identify any stressors that they might had, and we tried to help support their health by teaching them how to remove these stressors, etcetera. We did environmental assessment of this child's home. He was 8 years old, had alopecia universalis, which is no hair anywhere on his body, no eyelashes, no eyebrows, completely bald. And he'd had it since he was 3 years old. All of a sudden, when he was 3 years old, his hair started coming out in clumps. Now, the parents don't know why. So, when we went and did the assessment of his home, what we found is that we had to actually use, not just a regular EMF meter, but like a fancier electrical field meter that environmental consultants have. And we found out that he had some faulty wiring in the wall next to his bed that was putting off radiation 600 times the safe limit. So, like, this is the kind of radiation that would cause cancer. So what we learned, and this is all on our website too, if you go into Documentary Help and you look up the flight study and some of our experiences, we talk about this. What we learned was that this child was in his parents' bedroom, sleeping in his parents' bedroom, and then at 3 years old, when his baby sister was born, they moved him into his big boy bed. And when they moved him into his bed is right near that electrical exposure, and that's when all his hair started falling out. We put it together after the fact, the timeline of this. But what was interesting is once we had learned that, the family, you can't like take the house down and pull out the wiring right away, and they wanted to do something about it, so they shut the breaker off. And what they found when they shut the breaker off is they noticed that when he used to get up in the morning so moody and cranky and irritable, and mood and behavioral issues were always a thing for him in addition to the alopecia. That was something they were struggling with. And they found when they had shut the circuit breaker off at night, he woke up refreshed, feeling better. And he eventually did start growing back some eyelashes and little tiny buds on his hair, and he's still on his journey. But that's a perfect example of an invisible health stressor that's part of the modern world that wasn't there for our grandparents. They didn't have they could have had a faulty electrical. That's definitely possible, but not to the degree in the amount of electricity we're exposed to, the amount of EMF, the amount of electrical radiation that's in the modern world. It's everywhere. So, of course, that's going to be a stressor on our bodies.
Oh, absolutely. And our kids are so much more susceptible to these stressors than we are, right? Because we're adults, our body has developed. Oftentimes, I think our brain develops up until the age of like 25, 28. And after that, right, we're adults. And of course, it's not healthy for us, but for these little kids who are growing, it is such a huge stressor. This is why I think we have such a huge epidemic right now because they can't handle it. They just can't handle it.
Right. Right, and also the other reason why I'm so passionate about this work is, what you just described is number 1, because their little bodies cannot tolerate what our adult bodies can tolerate, and they're still developing. They've got this whole developmental timeline they needed to go through, and then there's so many opportunities to interrupt and impact and have lifelong influences from that. But the other reason I'm so passionate about this is because they are not the ones making decisions. Like they are these children who are dependent on us to provide them with food and housing and safety. And when we are putting them in an environment that's unhealthy and unsafe, like they have no choice in the matter. But we also, as parents, we don't know this stuff. We weren't raised in a way to look out for these things. Like we've had to figure this out. I feel like Gen X is probably the first generation of parents who's like all of a sudden waking up to the way that Americans started living kind of in the post World War II modern industrial era. Like that's not safe. And so we have to take charge and protect our children because they're not making these choices. We have
Yeah.
to make the choices for them.
Absolutely. And this is why I have completely changed my model of care because as a speech therapist, like I only worked with the child. But if there is no generalization in the home, It's so hard for these skills that we're trying to teach or these things we're trying to change in the child's behavior. They're not going to manifest if the parents are not on board. So this is why now I coach parents because I do believe in picky eating. This is what we need to do because there needs to be a big change in the home and then everything else comes after. So I agree. I agree. I think we're responsible for a lot of this and we can be the solution. I think we can help our kids thrive with these little changes we can make in our homes and the
Right.
environment.
And it feels more doable now than ever before. Like you were saying before, like political environment seems to be like their national debate and national dialogue about health is the first time in forever.
Yeah.
So it does feel like we're getting to a place where people are at least talking about it, which is huge
Yeah,
progress.
absolutely. So you've witnessed incredible stories of children healing, and I know we're kind of getting to that hour mark. I'm so sorry. But can you give us like another story of a child healing, maybe from autism symptoms or something else that was really chronic and seemed almost impossible to do?
We have so many incredible stories on our YouTube channel. I mean, we make it a point to try and put out one new healing success story every month, and it isn't always like, oh, they had this and then they fully reversed. Sometimes it's just like those little healing wins, like a child who wasn't speaking who now has some words. Like that's a healing win to me. You know what I mean? But one of my favorites was actually one of the first stories I ever heard when I was going through that healing journey with my own kids. I worked with a practitioner who did homotoxicology and nutrition, and she was teaching me a lot of the integrative, holistic kind of things. And the reason she was able to teach that is because she had been on a healing journey with her own family. And she had a son who was diagnosed at like 2.5 with severe autism at the Yale Child Study Center. So it wasn't like they missed the diagnosis. This was at Yale. He was nonverbal. He had apraxia. He had seizures. I mean, this was a very, very sick little boy. And this was also like almost 30 years ago that this happened. So this was a mom that was a true pioneer because 30 years ago, nobody was talking about healing autism. I mean, her son was one of the first in that big wave of kids that developed autism suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere. So she didn't have a lot of help, but she figured it out. She actually went back. She had a PhD in something else and she went back to school to get a degree in nutrition. And then she learned about detoxification and she learned all these strategies to help support his health. And it took her a number of years, but by the time he was 8, he had totally lost his diagnosis and was indistinguishable from his neurotypical peers. And this was a kid who, again, who had severe seizures. So the seizures were gone, was not talking, and he was just, again, indistinguishable. And the best part of this is that he went on to get his PhD and in like, I think chemical engineering, and he just got married
Wow.
last year. So like just an amazing, incredible success story. But if you think about there's that juncture, right, that parent had to take. And she could have gone the conventional route, which would have been behavioral therapy, which would have been listening to the doctors who were telling her that she needed to put him in an institution. So start saving your money so that you can put him in an institution. He'll never talk. He'll always have these seizures and need to be on medication. Like this really horrible doom and gloom story. That was one path she could have taken if she followed the conventional medical dictates for her
Mhm.
son. But she decided, nope, I think there's something else going on here. I'm going to learn what I can. She took this whole other path. And now she has this incredible son who's 30, maybe 31 right now, living his best life, married,
Wow.
and has a career. And like, how incredible is that? Those are our choices right now
Yeah.
we have for our
Yeah.
kids. The sad part about it is the first choice, the medical model, the behavioral therapy is pretty much what most parents are exposed to. They're not told about the other
They're
path.
not.
So that is my passion and my mission is just the information, just to let people know. So that's why these success stories are so important to me because if we can document that these kids are getting better, we can show the parents and the practitioners there's another path. And we just published a paper in a peer-reviewed journal about a set of twin girls who reversed their level 3 or severe autism diagnosis. And that is like the fourth or fifth paper to go into peer-reviewed literature about autism reversal. And we just got accepted a second paper about a boy who reverses autism going into the medical literature. And that's important because when you go to your doctor and say, if you have a child with autism and you say, I heard autism is reversible, that doctor today is going to tell you there's no evidence for that.
Right.
That's not true. Well,
Yeah.
second of all, we're working very hard every day to put more evidence behind that into the medical literature so the doctor can't say that anymore. And then the parent can go, oh, yes, there is. Here's 2 studies. Here's 4 studies. Here's 7 studies. that show you that autism is reversible in many cases.
Absolutely. And your work is so important. Thank you for what you're doing. This is incredible. And documenting hope, and you're giving hope to so many parents. And I really think a lot of them need it. Like you said, this information is not out there. And that's a travesty. If I had a child who had these types of symptoms and I found out about it when he was 15 or 16, I would be so mad. Like, how is this not
Mhm.
mainstream information? Like, we need to
Mhm.
start, because the earlier we start, the better for the child. So it's never too late. Never too late. There's so many things we can do, but the earlier the better. So this should be front page news.
I agree. I agree. Working on
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So my last question, which I ask every guest, if you could share just one piece of advice with parents who want to raise healthier, more resilient kids in today's world, what would it be?
It would be to pay attention to your own health, mindset, and regulation. Because especially for parents who have children that are affected in some way, whether it's like a life-threatening food allergy or autism, like we're in a state of like heightened stress and panic sometimes if your child's severely affected. And we're like, what? I just need to focus on my child. I need to like make sure they're fixed or they're safe or whatever it is. But our kids are so tightly connected to us. Like their nervous system and our nervous system are in sync all the time, and they're subconsciously reading your nervous system. So, the one piece of advice I often say to parents is just pay attention to your own health, your own nervous system regulation, your own capacity to be able to stay calm, stay present. Because even though it doesn't feel super powerful in terms of like a healing modality or keeping your kids healthy, it's probably one of the most powerful things you can do is to keep yourself regulated, keep yourself calm, and keep yourself present for your child and just meet them with love. That's like the most powerful free thing there is.
That I couldn't agree more. That's exactly right. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This conversation was so needed and it was so resourceful. Thank you so much. I can't wait for everybody to hear this.
Yeah, my
Yeah, if
pleasure.
anybody wanted to connect with you, where can they find you?
You can go to documentinghope.com. That's where all of our resources are. Somebody can reach out to me at Beth Lambert at documentinghope.com. That's an email they can reach me. But I encourage people to definitely check out our website. We have a great search engine on there, and anything you're looking for, you can use the search engine.
Amazing. Perfect. So I'm going to make sure to put that in our show notes as well. Okay. Well, thank
Great.
you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to the Livin'Sky Podcast. If this episode resonated, please leave a quick 5-star review or share it with another parent who'd love it too. It really helps more families find the support that they need. And don't forget to join my newsletter at LenaLivin'Sky.com for more tips and free guides. Sending a little sunshine to your kitchen today. See you next time.